Today we are here with Major Burrescia, the program director for the MS4 program at Texas A&M
Yes.
Army ROTC. Before we begin, could you just give us a brief overview of your Army career so far, sir?
Brief Army career, graduated from Texas A&M in May of 2000. Went to, a month or two later, started the engineer OBC course at the time. That was what they call it, Engineer Bullock now. Once that was complete, around October time frame, went to the 1st Cav Division in Fort Hood, Texas, where I was a member of the 20th Engineer Battalion, the Lumberjack Battalion, and I spent time in Bravo Company 20th Engineers as the 2nd Platoon Leader, the Assault and Obstacle Platoon Leader, and the Executive Officer of the company. I was a young captain before I left that company. I left right after 9/11. I went up to the battalion staff in preparation for the OIF-2 deployment to Baghdad, Iraq. Did that. It was a 12-month deployment with 1st Brigade, 1st Cav. Came back, kind of on deployment, made the decision to stay in the Army after my initial commitment, and went to the Armored Advance course in Fort Knox, Kentucky at the time. I was in an armored brigade. I knew I wanted to serve. I had an opportunity to go immediately back to 1st Brigade, 1st Cav, an armored brigade, and I wanted to have more, a better background on how to talk to maneuver officers. So I went to the Armored Advance course that prepared me to some degree. Went back to 1st Brigade, 1st Cav, went on my 2nd deployment. I was the brigade engineer at the start of the deployment, moved down to company command in the Echo Company of 2A Cav, which is a tank battalion in 1st Brigade. And conclusion of that, came back from the 15-month surge rotation in OIF 0608. Changed out company command, it's over just like that. Went to graduate school for a year and a half at Georgia Tech. Then went to work for the Corps of Engineers in Korea for 2 years as kind of a repayment for the grad school opportunity that was paid for by Corps of Engineers. Came back from Korea, went to ILE for a few months. Immediately went to Operations Officer S3XO job in the 92nd Engineer Battalion at Fort Stewart. Deployed with them to Afghanistan for 9 months. Came back as the Executive Officer, spent another maybe 16 to 18 months in that job, and then was given the opportunity to come to Texas A&M as the Assistant Professor of Military Science. But because we have a 700-plus man program, I'm the Seniors MS4 Instructor or Program Director, and that's the position I hold to this day. That's it.
What do you expect from a new lieutenant, and what's the most common thing for a new 2nd lieutenant to fail at?
So one of the things I expect from a new lieutenant is, number one, I expect loyalty. I want to develop a team. I want to reinforce the team mindset, and I would expect a 2nd lieutenant to be loyal to the company, loyal to the battalion. Sometimes you'll see young people will kind of be on a hunt for what benefits them as an individual. They're not a team player. The way we go through deployments and train-ups these days, we need a loyal, cohesive team. That stems from me as the senior leader, but I would want 2nd lieutenants to be loyal, and I would want them to be fit. And one of the things that I see them mess up a lot is they'll show up to an organization unprepared. They come straight from college. They were big boozers. They were big partiers. They come to the company level unprepared. And I've seen 2nd lieutenants from different schools fail their initial PT test and not get a platoon. And they have to sit around on deployment for about 6 months before we finally give them a platoon. They take another PT test. It's very difficult. So you want to come to the unit prepared, because that's the first look that people have of you. So fitness, loyalty, and ultimately an open mind. I'm not looking for little generals. I'm not looking for little Napoleons to show up. I think that's maybe a misnomer that 2nd lieutenants are platoon leaders, but that they have this level of control, and they don't. They don't, because as a company commander or a battalion commander, I'm not going to allow them to have that kind of control. Very seldom, I haven't seen it a lot, where the platoon leader is at odds with the platoon sergeant, and that creates big problems. I haven't really seen that. So I think for the most part, guys will come. They'll get their expectations tempered by the squad leaders and the platoon sergeant, and they'll be successful. But come to the unit prepared physically, with an open mind, and be loyal, and they'll do well.
The question is, what training do we not receive as cadets that you think we should implement in order to become better second lieutenants?
So we're just now finishing the first semester of the senior year, and as we go into the second semester, we start to spend more time on company level training and executive officer training at the company level. And so what you all will receive is, when you go to a heavy unit like I did for a lot of my career, maintenance is huge. How the maintenance process works, how the supply system works. I honestly believe that as a company commander, you can take the guidon, put your desk in the supply room after you've done all your company level inventories, and then keep your office and stay in that supply room until it's time to leave, because if you don't have good supply management as a company commander, you'll lose volumes of money out of your own personal paycheck. You need to train your platoon leaders. Platoon leaders need to come in having an idea of platoon equipment accountability, to the last tool in the tool bag. That is something that was a big deal for me in the past 16 years, was property accountability. Because when we come back from deployments, and a lot of times a platoon leader will show up to a unit that just came back off deployment, and there are just connexes and connexes and connexes in the motor pool full of equipment that either no one knows exists, they're not signed for. A lot of times during time of war, like an engineer unit, the engineer branch will push equipment down to us at the company level to utilize. It would go on our books, and stuff is left in theater, stuff's brought back home, there's a change of command ceremony, and it might be overlooked. And so property accountability is a huge piece. Entire installations at 3ID at Fort Stewart were shut down over a period of time so that people could clean sweep and get rid of all the containers and the stuff in those containers, so that we could have a proper accountability of what was on MTO of a unit. So having what you're supposed to have based off what the MTO says is ideal. There's some additional stuff you can have to make the platoon or the company better. But at the end of the day, if there was more training I wanted y'all to have, it's not tactics. Your NCOs and soldiers will know how to conduct a raid better than you ever will. A lot of them have Ranger School and Sapper School experience, and they just know more than you do. So as a manager, you're not a trainer, you're a manager. I think that supply accountability and maintenance operations is right there at the top with what y'all need to know.
What would be some qualities or characteristics that you would look for in a lieutenant?
Qualities and characteristics?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big fan of the Jocko Willink podcast and his book Extreme Ownership. And so I think that the qualities I'm looking for in a lieutenant when they show up, aside from the ones we mentioned earlier, I want them to do just that, have ownership of the problem sets. When I took over as the battalion executive officer for 92nd Engineers, I had a colonel in 06 come to me and walk through my motor pool and ask me questions. And on the top of a container there was a couple of lawn chairs. One of the most random items in Afghanistan on top of a deployable container were a couple of lawn chairs. And the question was, Burrescia, why is that up there? I'd never seen it in my life. And I said, sir, I have absolutely no idea. I'll deal with it. And then what I failed to do is the next line I said was, I just took over this job. And then he asked the question, how long have you been in this job? And I said, I've been in it for 2 weeks. And he said, well, that's long enough. Every problem associated with the executive officer in this organization belongs to you. And I had to accept that. So extreme ownership is what I want of my lieutenants. I don't want them to come in and make excuses for why things are not getting done. I want them to own the problem, and I want them to stand up. I think there's a certain amount of ownership where you stand up and own the problem, and it shows a level of determination and assertiveness to me as your company commander, battalion commander, that I have a great deal of respect for. Those that kind of have a level of cowardice and point the finger and blame someone, or say, hey, subordinates, we got to go pick up trash today because the first sergeant said so, or we got to pick up trash today because the company commander said so. As a lieutenant, I want you to own the orders that were given to you by the company commander. So, own it.
Okay. What piece of life advice do you wish all second lieutenants should have?
Life advice: you need to you need to have an honest conversation with the significant other in your life. I see generationally, I see a lot of young cadets getting engaged before they graduate from school. Getting engaged being like something they have to get done. Get married is something they have to get done. Not for that reason, but I also see a lot of marriages fail in the short run. Marriage to me is something that's very important. You're not likely to see too many officers that don't thank their wife at promotion or when they get a new job. So we want to take marriage, it needs to be serious. It needs to be not necessarily a priority for everybody. Focus on the development of yourself, because a lot of times we see in young relationships the partners, the two people in the relationship aren't mature. They're doing what they think is the right thing to do and what culturally seems to be the right thing to do, but when they get out there in the big bad world and they're living off of each other and they're financially providing for one another, they're not really emotionally in touch with themselves. They don't really know how to give any emotional advice to their partner, and so the marriage falls apart, and over a matter of time the performance at work, on the job, during deployments, that kind of thing starts to fail as well. So if there's anything I would want people to know before they left and went into the Army was to, if you have someone in your life, have a genuine conversation. One thing I like to put out to my students is that the jobs that move well from a husband to wife standpoint are a school teacher and a nurse. I've since added things like 2-year degrees like dental hygienist and physician's assistant. Those are jobs that are tied to the medical field and education that, from a wife perspective, travel well. It's if your wife wants to work. I see a lot of young men trying to take on alpha females that have more potential in their military career than the guy does, and they don't have that conversation about who's going to take lead, and the relationship suffers because they're both aspiring. Sometimes if they're in the same branch, they're competing against each other for promotion and for position. So some challenges can arise based on who you think you want to marry and why. So have that conversation.
What was the last good leadership book you read?
Well, we read a lot of books in class. We have a lot of guest speakers that come in and talk about those books. At any one time, I've probably got 3 or 4 books going at the same time, so completion of books isn't too timely. But in the past year, 2 of the most significant books that kind of keep ringing true are Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, which is a story of Navy SEALs and it's learning its leadership points of Navy SEALs in Ramadi, and it's not a glorification. It, in a lot of ways, is a conversation about what they failed to do and the mistakes they made, and it's basically about a 7-step process of here are 7 attributes of leadership that if you can get a grasp on these, a handle on these, arguably you'll be successful. So I listen to the Jocko podcast religiously, and I've introduced that to a lot of young leaders. He's a very powerful and charismatic, military leader that I enjoy listening to. The other book was General McChrystal's Team of Teams. For me, the third of the book was the most valuable, where it talked about the shared consciousness within the group and a way to get after that. So in the second semester of the senior year, I inject a concept of shared consciousness within the senior class. I've got about 120 students, so a shared consciousness across 120 students is valuable and important and necessary. And I think that when we couple the leadership values of the Jocko Willink Extreme Ownership book and the attitude of extreme ownership, then I reduce the number of excuses that we have, and the General McChrystal shared consciousness concept, very similar to a commander's update brief daily in a theater of combat. Those concepts kind of melded together help us create what I would argue to be some of the I prepare young leaders to the best of our ability here at Texas A&M by them having access to this literature and just having It's about building the toolbox. They've got the tools they need, and the way they choose to employ them is up to them. But I think that I've given them book lists and book ideas, and we talk about that stuff so that they're as the best prepared they can be. That's it.